Frank Miniter from Forbes joins us to talk about his latest column, What President Obama Says He Will Do to Your Gun Rights. Frank, thanks so much for coming on the show tonight, sir.
Good to be here again, Cam.
You bet. And again, it's what Obama would do to your gun rights, not do for them.
No, well, that's exactly right. And it's interesting that that topic did come up in the second debate.
Yeah.
And he actually did begin to answer the question, which, I'm not surprised that he wants another assault weapons ban. I think anyone paying attention should already know that. I mean, that was pretty clear. But what really surprised me was his hubris. His arrogance just to actually start speaking on a topic, and it was just so clear he really is in over his head. I mean, he referred to automatic weapons. We needed to get those off the streets of Chicago. Well, I haven't heard about an automatic weapon being used on the streets of Chicago, at least any time, since the gangster era.
Right.
He's talking about semi-automatic firearms, that basic idea, and then he says that we need to take all arms that have been used or are being used or designed for the battlefield out of the hands of freedom-loving Americans. And we from muskets on up through to today, every firearm type we use has been used on the battlefield and is designed that way. It's a part of the freedom of our culture that the private and the public are together. Citizen soldiery. This is even at the basis of the beginning of the National Rifle Association was to train soldiers after the American Civil War. They saw they didn't shoot quite as well, especially the Northerners who were coming mostly from industrialized cities, and they just didn't shoot very well. So they wanted to actually put together a training program for them. It's so ingrained in our history and who we are, and yet here we have the president so out of touch with our own history.
No, you're right. In fact, I recently reread American Rifle by Alexander Rose that came out a couple of years ago, and tracing the history of the rifle, and from the days of the musket and the Pennsylvania rifle, and the debate within the Army through much of the 19th and early 20th century between the idea of the marksman, the sharpshooter, and the idea of the mass formations of infantry and just a sheer barrage of lead down range, and how the NRA actually played a role in that debate, and frankly probably saved a lot of lives in World War I. These are, you're right, Frank. Now, look, I don't expect the president to be an expert on matters of the Second Amendment, but know the difference between a semi-auto and a full auto when you're talking about guns you want to ban. I mean, if you're saying you want to ban these guns, you should at least be able to correctly define them, shouldn't you?
Absolutely, and let's carry this forward and take a bigger, broader look at what he's really referring to. He was referring to the context of an assault weapons ban, so he's referring to this in context of what he considered to be a so-called assault weapon.
Right.
We both know that that's a very nebulous kind of definition.
Yeah.
But that's what he's really referring to here. So then that's why I got into that in the end of this thing, and looking at the Chicago crime rates is what he started to talk about and what's going on. They're headed to be the murder capital of the country this year. Unfortunately, it's over 400 murders there now, that are perpetuated in an area that really has very, very strict gun control. And their idea for combating that gun crime is to take guns away from everyone else in all the other states. This has actually been said by their police superintendent. So that's their idea, that's their ideology, and they don't care that the facts bear it out very clearly that more guns do equal less crime, that if they want to reduce crime, it's very clear how they can do it. It happened in Washington, D.C., it's happened in other places when people do get their freedoms back, that gun crime does go down when people can defend themselves. They don't care about all those studies and all those real facts. What they really just want is push their own ideology, and that tells you a lot about what President Obama would do in a second term.
I think you're absolutely right. And, there are, and I think most gun owners get it, frankly. I've not heard a lot of pushback from this. Now, I've heard pushback from the left. It's, oh, come on, Frank. Barack Obama signed 2 pro-gun bills. He's not going to do anything. And then you start talking about Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor. And I actually haven't heard an Obama supporter have an answer to gun owners' concerns about the types of judges that Barack Obama would appoint to the bench.
No, they've been very quiet about it.
And they really
Obama
have been.
did talk about that a little bit in his second debate. He said he wanted reasonable people on the bench and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he hasn't really been called out on that. But this is part of it. This is part of what he considers reasonable.
Well, absolutely. And so what he considers reasonable most people, and certainly most gun owners, would consider to be ridiculous and something that they wouldn't stand for. And so, you know, you look at so the other argument is that Congress is going to be a bulwark against President Obama, but we know that that's not the case, Frank. We can't trust that to be the case because the president has shown a great propensity to simply avoid Congress when he feels like it's necessary.
By executive order, of course. And as you mentioned with the Supreme Court, who knows how many picks the next guy could get?
Yeah.
It's just critical right at this point in time. But I'm just happy that it came up, and I wish it was being talked about a little more. I mean, I don't think it should be a central issue possibly in this campaign, but I was surprised that I saw so little press come out after that on that portion of that debate.
I think. I think it's because two things. The media is certainly more than willing to talk about issues that are not top-line issues, this election season. I think it's fair to say for most voters of the, 90, however many millions of tens of millions of voters we're going to have on Election Day, the Second Amendment rights probably not going to be number one issue for a majority of them. It's a jobs and economy election. But, they've been willing to talk about abortion. They've been more than willing to talk about, Seamus the dog and,
contraception.
Right, exactly. But you're right. They didn't want to talk about gun control. They didn't praise the president for saying he wanted to reinstitute the semi-auto ban in a second term. And, again, I think it's because the media knows it's a loser issue. And they would not be helping the president by highlighting his remarks, much like I don't know if you saw, Frank, Mayor Bloomberg announced he's spending about $15 million on 6 to 12 races between now and Election Day, but he's not publicly saying what candidates he's supporting because he knows that would probably hurt those candidates, not help them.
Yeah, it would.
I mean, we are a nation that is not crying out for new gun control laws because we know that the old gun control laws didn't do anything to make us safer. Look at Chicago. Look at Washington, D.C. Look at New Jersey.
No, we've understood. I think the American public now, and in polls bear this out, have really now come around on this and understand that it's the opposite way, actually. It's when you have your freedom and you can protect yourself. The cop can't always be there to protect you. That crime begins to go down. I just wish it would get through to the White House a little bit, the current White House a little bit, but, that can be changed.
Yeah, I wish it would get to the White House. I also wish, as you point out, it would get through to the folks there in Chicago, Illinois. You talk about Rahm Emanuel and the police superintendent, Jerry McCarthy. I'm sure you've seen now Superintendent McCarthy is calling for a lost or stolen bill in Illinois, that if you are the victim of a burglary and your guns are stolen and you fail to provide a full and complete accounting of every firearm that was stolen from you within 48 hours of when or should have known that the gun was stolen, then you're a crime. You're a criminal. You're charged with a crime.
So the law-abiding person becomes a felon, and right, and you see what's going on those streets. And it drives me nuts. That's why I did put a link into in my column in Forbes to a site that's cataloging all the victims now of this gun violence. A lot of it's gang-on-gang stuff, but there's a lot of people being caught between. There was one little girl shot down at her lemonade stand. This kind of thing is going on there, and this isn't necessary. There are proven ways that they can reduce this violence and save these lives. If they won't do it because they're a very state-centric ideology. Yeah,
I think you're right, Frank, and I think it's sad because I think they're just barking up the wrong tree by continuing to call for more and more gun control laws rather than doing something, as you say, that'll actually work. Frank, we're almost out of time, sir, but I really appreciate you coming on the program. Great talking to you tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cam.